The ceremonial blade pressed against Marcus Cole's throat drew a single bead of blood before the Empress raised her hand. "Da, body?" The executioner froze. 12,000 Valanthi nobles in the grand amphitheater fell silent, their iridescent scales catching the light of 3 suns as they turned toward their ruler. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his knees aching against the obsidian platform, his wrists bound behind him with energy cords that hummed with barely contained violence. "This human was found in the sacred meditation gardens," the High Prosecutor declared, his voice echoing through the crystalline chamber. "The penalty is death. It has been death for 3,000 years. There is no exception." Empress Saelith Orkana descended from her throne, each step deliberate, her silver robes trailing behind her like liquid moonlight. She was tall, all Valanthi were, but she moved with a weariness that Marcus recognized. He'd seen it in the mirror every morning for the past 5 years, ever since the accident that took his daughter and left him wandering the galaxy with nothing but guilt and a decommissioned cargo ship. She stopped before him, close enough that he could see the intricate scarring around her eyes, ritual marks he knew from his cultural briefings, given to those who had lost their bonded mate. "You entered the gardens knowing the penalty?" she asked. "I did." "Why?" Marcus swallowed. The truth seemed absurd now, faced with execution. "I heard someone crying. I thought someone was hurt." A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. The Valanthi did not cry. Their tear ducts had evolved away millennia ago. To suggest the Empress had been weeping was either madness or the gravest insult. But Saelith's expression didn't change. Something flickered in her golden eyes, surprise perhaps, or something older and more painful. "You risked death," she said slowly, "because you believed someone needed help. That's generally how it works, yes?" The High Prosecutor stepped forward. "Empress, this human mocks our sacred. He will serve in my household." Saelith's voice cut through the objection like a blade through silk. "As per the ancient right of Velthana. His life is forfeit to me. I claim it." The amphitheater erupted. Marcus watched the chaos unfold with the detached calm of a man who had stopped caring whether he lived or died years ago. Nobles shouted. Prosecutor's face contorted with outrage. Somewhere in the upper gallery someone was actually throwing things. The Empress watched it all with the same tired patience she'd shown since the moment she'd stopped his execution. Then she looked down at him again. "Can you cook?" Marcus blinked. "What? Cook? Prepare food? My previous kitchen attendant was dismissed. I can make about 12 things that won't kill you. That will suffice." She turned to her guards. "Take him to the service quarters. Clean him. Find him appropriate clothing." A pause. "And remove the execution cords. They leave marks." As the guards hauled him to his feet, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the Empress ascending to her throne. The nobles were still in chaos around her, their protests rising like a tide of glittering scales and sharp voices. She sat alone in the center of it all, untouched and untouching. He recognized that too. 3 weeks into his service, Marcus had learned several things about the Valanthi Imperial Court. First, the Empress had no friends. She had advisors, supplicants, relatives who wanted her power, and an endless parade of potential suitors who treated her like a prize to be won. But no one who simply talked to her. Second, the previous kitchen attendant hadn't been dismissed. He'd been executed for attempting to poison her. The one before that had been a spy for her cousin's faction. The one before that had tried to assassinate her with a serving fork. Third, Saelith Orkana ate alone every single meal, in a small chamber off the main kitchens, where Marcus brought her food and then retreated to the doorway to wait. "You're staring again," she said on the 22nd night, not looking up from her untouched plate. "Apologies, Empress. You don't sound apologetic. You haven't eaten in 3 days. It's concerning." She finally raised her eyes. In the soft glow of the bioluminescent panels, her scales shimmered between deep violet and midnight blue. The scars around her eyes seemed deeper in this light. "Are you concerned for my health, or for what happens to you if I die?" "The first one. Why?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe. He'd stopped standing at rigid attention after the first week, when she told him his posture was giving her a headache. "Because you saved my life. Because you're the first person in 3 years who's asked me a question that wasn't about cargo manifests or fuel prices. Because you look like you're carrying something too heavy, and I know what that looks like." Silence stretched between them. The Empress set down her utensils. She hadn't used them anyway, and folded her hands in her lap. "My mate died 4 years ago," she said. "The official records say it was a hunting accident. The unofficial truth is that my sister's faction arranged it to destabilize my rule. He was gentle, kind-eyed. He didn't want to be emperor consort. He just wanted..." She stopped. "It doesn't matter what he wanted. It matters. He's dead. That doesn't mean what he wanted stops mattering." Saelith looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "You speak strangely for a servant." "I wasn't always a servant. I was a father, a husband. I had a family and a home and a future." Marcus heard his own voice crack and forced it steady. "Then one day I made a decision, just a small one, taking a shortcut through an asteroid field to save time, and everything I loved was gone. So when I say that what your mate wanted still matters, I'm speaking from experience. The dead don't stop mattering just because they're dead. The Empress was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her utensils and began to eat. Marcus was cleaning the kitchen when she appeared in the doorway 3 hours later. He hadn't expected to see her again that night. She rarely left her quarters after the evening meal. I want you to walk with me, she said. Horse Empress. Saelith. He paused, dishcloth in hand. That's not. I know what it is and isn't. I'm telling you what I want to be called when we are alone. Her scales shifted color slightly. Embarrassment, he'd learned, or vulnerability. Will you walk with me? The gardens were different at night. The crystalline flowers that had seemed sharp and dangerous in the daylight softened into gentle luminescence, their petals catching starlight and reflecting it in cascades of color. The 3 moons hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of silver and rose. They walked in silence for a long time. Saelith's robes whispered against the stone path. Marcus's boots, Valanthe made now, softer than anything he'd worn before, made almost no sound at all. I was here the night you found me, she said eventually. In the meditation alcove by the silver fountain. I know, you could have walked away. You should have. The penalty was clearly posted. I heard someone who sounded like they needed help. Everything else was just details. Saelith stopped walking. They stood beneath an arch of flowering vines, blue petals drifting down around them like snow. Why won't you touch me like the others did? Question hit Marcus like a physical blow. What? Every servant I've had. Every courtier. Every suitor. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. They find reasons to touch me. A hand on my arm to guide me. Fingers brushing mine when they serve my food. A palm on my back during ceremonies. Always taking. Always claiming. And you? She turned to face him, and her golden eyes were bright with something that might have been pain. You keep your distance. You bow but you don't grovel. You look at me like I'm a person instead of a throne. Why? Marcus's heart ached in his chest. Not for himself, not this time, but for this woman who had been touched so often by those who wanted something from her that she had forgotten what it was like to simply be left alone with her own boundaries. Because touch should be given, not taken, he said quietly. Because you're not an object to be handled. Because I watched you sit alone in that throne room while everyone around you screamed about politics and power. And all I could think was, she's exhausted, and no one notices, and no one cares. He took a breath. I don't touch you because you haven't asked me to. And I won't, not ever, unless you do. A petal drifted down and settled on her shoulder. She didn't brush it away. And if I asked, then I would be honored. Saelith looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she extended her hand. Marcus took it gently, carefully, and felt her fingers tremble against his. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Be seen. Be touched without expectation. I've forgotten. Then we'll figure it out together. As slow as you need. They stood there beneath the flowering arch hand in hand while the moons traced their path across the sky. The political storm broke 6 weeks later. Marcus was serving the morning meal when the High Prosecutor burst into the Empress's private dining chamber, flanked by 4 members of the Imperial Council. This farce ends now. Lord Veltharic slammed a data tablet onto the table, scattering Saelith's carefully arranged breakfast. A human. A servant. Seen walking in the gardens with the Empress. Holding her hand. Do you have any idea what this means? Saelith didn't flinch. I am aware of what I do with my own hands, Lord Veltharic. You shame the throne. You shame your mate's memory. You do not. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Saelith rose from her chair, and Marcus saw the ruler she must have been before grief had hollowed her out. Do not speak to me of my mate's memory. You were the one who argued against our union. You said he was too soft, too gentle, too weak. And when he died, her voice cracked, just slightly. You were the first to suggest I should bond again. To one of your sons, perhaps. Lord Veltharic's scales flushed dark with anger. The succession is my concern. Not yours. And this human, she gestured toward Marcus, who had retreated to his usual position by the doorway. This human has shown me more genuine respect in 2 months than you have in 20 years. Respect? The word dripped with contempt. He's a servant. He sees barely out of their own atmosphere. He cannot give you heirs. He cannot strengthen alliances. He makes me want to eat again. Saelith's voice went quiet. He makes me want to see another sunrise. He looks at me like I matter, not like I'm a tool for someone else's ambitions. So you will forgive me, Lord Veltharic, if I value his company over yours. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Lord Veltharic smiled. A cold, calculated expression that made Marcus's stomach drop. Very well, Empress. Let the human prove his worth. He turned to the council members. I invoke the trial of Kaveth. If human would be companion to our Empress, let him demonstrate the qualities we require, strength, cunning, and endurance. Saelith went pale. That trial hasn't been invoked and it has never been formally abolished. By law, I am within my rights. Veltharak's smile widened. The human will face the trials tomorrow at dawn. If he survives, I will withdraw my objection. If he dies, a shrug. Then perhaps the Empress will remember her duty. They swept out as quickly as they had arrived. Marcus looked at Saelith. Her hands were shaking. What's the trial of Saelith? It's a remnant from our warrior past. 3 trials. Combat, strategy, and survival. She turned to him, and her eyes were bright with tears that her species could no longer shed. It was designed for Valanthi. Our strength, our physiology, our neural processing. No human could possibly. What happens if I refuse? You'll be executed for the insult. And I... She closed her eyes. I'll be declared unfit to rule. My sister will take the throne. Everything I've worked to build, every reform, every protection for the outer colonies, gone. Marcus walked to her. Slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He took her hands in his. Then I won't refuse, you'll die. Maybe. He managed a small smile. But I've been dying slowly for 5 years, Saelith. At least this way it might mean something, no? Her fingers tightened around his. I won't let you. You can't stop me, and I wouldn't want you to. He reached up and gently brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. You asked me once why I entered the gardens that night. The truth is, I was looking for a reason to keep going. I heard someone in pain, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than numb. You gave me that. Let me give you something back. Saelith stared at him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, a Valanthi gesture he knew of profound trust. Survive, she whispered. That's all I ask, just survive. The night before the trial, Saelith came to his quarters. It was improper, scandalous really. But she slipped through the service corridors in a plain cloak. And when Marcus opened his door, she simply stood there, looking at him with those golden eyes. I couldn't sleep, she said. Neither could I. Can I stay? Marcus stepped aside. They sat on his narrow bed. Servants' quarters weren't meant for comfort, and talked through the night. She told him about her childhood in the Imperial Gardens, about her mother's cold ambition, about the day she'd met her mate and known, instantly, that he was different from everyone else. He told her about Earth, about his wife's laugh, about his daughter's first steps, about the moment the proximity alarms had started screaming and he'd known, with terrible certainty, that he was going to lose everything. Somewhere in the small hours her head came to rest on his shoulder. I'm not ready to lose someone else, he whispered. Then I won't let you. You can't promise that. No. He pressed a kiss to her hair, gentle, careful, asking nothing. But I can try. The arena was ancient, carved into a mountain's heart 10,000 years before humans had discovered fire. Marcus stood in the center, dressed in the simple white garments of a trial participant. Above him, 20,000 Valanthi watched from tiered galleries. The Empress sat on the ceremonial throne, her face carved from ice, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly he could see her knuckles from across the arena. Lord Veltharak announced the trials with obvious satisfaction. First was combat, 3 Valanthi warriors armed with energy staffs, against 1 unarmed human. Marcus had expected to lose. He was smaller, weaker, slower than any Valanthi. But he'd spent 5 years hauling cargo through dangerous ports, talking his way out of fights when he could, scrapping through them when he couldn't. He knew how to read an opponent's intentions. He knew how to make them underestimate him. He won, barely, by being unpredictable. When they expected him to retreat, he charged. When they coordinated, he broke their formation with desperate, scrambling tactics they'd never encountered. He finished the last warrior with a move he'd learned in a bar on Kepler 442b, and collapsed to his knees, bleeding from a dozen cuts. The crowd was silent with shock. The second trial was strategy, a complex war game that required processing dozens of variables simultaneously. The Valanthi opponent was a renowned tactician with the neural processing speed 3 times faster than any human. Marcus lost every simulation. His opponent dismantled his strategies with contemptuous ease. The crowd began to murmur. Finally, the human would fail. But the rules required only that he persist for 1 hour. They had assumed he would surrender long before then. Instead, Marcus kept playing. He lost and lost and lost again, but he learned from each defeat, adapted, grew slightly less terrible with each round. When the hour ended, his opponent looked at him with something that might have been respect. You do not give up, the tactician said. Humans rarely do. The third trial was survival. 3 days alone in the Velkath wastes, a frozen hellscape where temperatures dropped low enough to kill a Valanthi in hours. Marcus had no illusions about his chances. But Saelith had slipped him something before the trial. A tiny heating element hidden in his sleeve, technically forbidden but impossible to detect. A risk that could end her reign if discovered. She had risked everything for him. He would not waste that gift. 3 days later, a rescue skimmer found him in a cave system, huddled beside the corpse of a snow beast he'd killed with a sharpened rock. He was hypothermic, frostbitten, and barely conscious. But he was alive. Lord Velthorak's face when Marcus walked back into the arena, supported by 2 medics but walking, was worth every moment of agony. The human has completed the trials, the High Prosecutor was forced to announce. By ancient law he has proven his worth. The arena erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in protest. Marcus barely heard any of it. His eyes found Saelith on her throne, and he saw her, for the first time since he'd met her, smile. Not a diplomatic smile. Not a political smile. A real one. The formal ceremony was held 3 months later, after his wounds had healed, and the political opposition had been systematically dismantled by the Empress's allies. The reforms she'd been fighting for passed with unprecedented support. It seemed that many in the court had been waiting for someone to demonstrate that strength didn't always look the same. Marcus stood before the throne in robes of silver and blue, the colors of the imperial house, and listened to the Empress recite words that made him, officially, her consort. But the moment he would remember, the moment that mattered, came afterward, in the quiet of her chambers, when they were finally alone. Saelith stood by the window looking out at the 3 moons. Marcus came to stand beside her, close enough to touch, waiting for permission. She gave it by leaning into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Anything. That night in the gardens when you heard me crying." She turned to face him. "I was considering whether to end my life. I had decided that nothing would change, that nothing could change, that I was trapped in this role forever with no one who saw me as anything more than a symbol." Her golden eyes held his. And then a strange, stubborn human walked through a door he shouldn't have opened, heard something no one else could hear, and refused to leave. Marcus's heart clenched. "Saelith, you asked me once why I saved you. Why I invoked an ancient right to claim your life." She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, a gesture so intimate that it would have scandalized the court. "The truth is, I was saving myself. I just didn't know it yet." He covered her hands with his own. "I was lost when I came here. I had given up on everything, meaning, purpose, even the will to keep going. And then you looked at me like I mattered, and I started to remember what it felt like to be human. The good parts. The parts worth keeping. We saved each other." "Yeah." He smiled. "I guess we did." She kissed him then, soft, uncertain, like she was still learning how to want things for herself. He kissed her back the same way, gentle and patient, asking nothing she wasn't ready to give. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. "Why won't you touch me like the others did?" she whispered. The same question, but different now. Wondering, not wounded. "Because you deserve someone who waits for you," he answered. "Who lets you choose. Who sees you, all of you, and doesn't try to take anything you're not ready to give. And I'm ready now." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like a promise. "Then I'm here. For as long as you want me. Forever then." Forever sounds good. Outside, the 3 moons traced their eternal paths across the sky. In gardens below, the crystalline flowers caught their light and scattered it into rainbows. And in the quiet of the imperial chambers, 2 broken people held each other close and began at last to heal.